Our guest on Caribbeana today is Professor Odisa Palmer of the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. This is Ron Martin, and today we are talking about the elimination of violence against women because it's a period when the United Nations had dedicated to the eradication of violence against women. Tell us a bit about that. It's a major commemoration globally, Professor Palmer.
Thank you. It is indeed a major commemoration because the data is so alarmingly frightening. According to the UN, and I never know how these data are collected, every 11 minutes, every 11 minutes, one woman is murdered
Oh,
somewhere in the world based on gender-based violence,
yes,
usually by her husband or her partner or some other intimate relationships. So
right,
it's an alarming data
yeah,
that has to be looked at all over the world. Now,
right,
here in Jamaica, our statistic says every 4 out of 10 women in Jamaica have, in some point in their life, been subject to domestic violence, gender based violence.
right now.
So, even here in Jamaica and throughout the Caribbean, the
Yes,
data is alarming.
yes,
So,
yes.
from November 25th through November 25th is the International Day to celebrate women. From November 25th through December 10th, and December 10th is the humanitarian day. There are 16 days between November 25th and December 10th.
Mhm.
And within those 16 days, we invite the world community to be actively speaking about and working with us to stop gender based violence. Now,
Right.
let me tell people what that is if they don't know what it is.
Yes.
Gender based violence is very simply violence, physical oftentimes, but also emotional, psychological, and financial violence that is perpetrated 80% women. Men are also victims of gender based violence, but the large data 80% of women and girls are victims of gender based violence. And that occurs in the home, whether you're married, living together, or you just pass through once in a while.
Right.
It usually happens in the domestic space. And what a lot of people don't understand and really, really need to understand is that gender based violence does not only impact the woman and the man who are involved,
Yes.
it impacts the entire family. So, children, studies have shown that children who are in the home who witness gender based violence, they have school problems, they have bedwetting problems, they have all kinds of psychological impact. If
Mhm.
there are elders in the home, they're also impacted. It might not manifests itself in the very obvious way, but they're impacted. Up to your very pet that is there is impacted by this. So we as a community, certainly in Jamaica, we used to say, oh, it's man and woman business. It is not. It
Yeah.
is a community business. It's a social disease. And both the victim, the woman, and the man, the perpetrator, needs help.
Yeah.
Because if men do not get the psychological counseling that is necessary, they go from one woman to the next and they
Mhm.
do that. They abuse their children. They
Mhm.
often abuse other men, which is why we have violence. Men killing men is so high. So
Mhm.
you see, we have to understand that gender-based violence is a epidemic, not endemic, is an epidemic that impacts the entire society,
Yes.
and we need to eliminate it, of course, focusing these 16 days on the victim, which are women and children.
Right. 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 Do you find that young men are accepting this kind of assistance, support, direction, and guidance?
Well, I've been doing some focus groups, and I am very pleased to say that a lot of men, although most of the men in my workshops tend to be men between 30 to 50 who are, self-reflective and wanting to reach that. But
Right.
I think the education system needs to get involved because we're finding, particularly in the high school, when kids start to pair up together, particularly in the high school, that this now now tend to see this. There was a big case a couple months ago where a girl was supposedly going with one guy, and then she stopped and was going with another guy, and they ganged up and beat her. So we see that it's impacting the next generation, and what we want to make sure doesn't happen, that it doesn't impact the other generation. So we really have to start in the schools, and we have to establish programs that show men and women how to communicate with each other without violence, emotionally or physically,
Right.
how to do conflict resolution. You know, the Caribbean, certainly Jamaica, one of the key factors in our development is our inability to communicate effectively and work together. So,
Exactly.
conflict resolution, effective communication skills are primary. If we get that down, we can get the math, we can get the science, we can get all of these other things, the technology that they say we need to be part of the developing world. But we have to get the basics together, and we are
Right.
hurting each
Yeah.
other.
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, I see that communication is one of the tools which are so important. And, in teaching, because my wife and I used to teach marriage prep, and we discovered that the communication skills are the important ingredient that was so necessary to link the elements together. Um, so we are not paying sufficient attention in our society to communicating.
No, we're not. And particularly in this era where people are communicating on their phones. You know, I go everywhere and people are at dinner, people are at social events, and they're communicating on their phones.
Yeah.
People don't know this generation behind me and one behind me, two by two now or three,
Right. Right.
they do not know how to communicate with each other. They do not know how to speak with each other. They are so vulnerable and so protective about sharing how they're feeling. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of miscommunication that happens. There's also a lot of isolation, which I think leads to the anger escalating so quickly because, you
Right.
know, we can all live perfectly by ourselves.
Right.
That's easy. But how do
Yeah.
we live in community, in harmony with others? And that's where the challenge comes in. And
Right.
so communication is still key and essential and important.
Right. Right. What role do you see politics play in all of this? The
Well,
politicians.
politics plays an important part because the government, you know, through its various agencies here in Jamaica, we have the Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport, which is a very large portfolio. And then within that, we have the Bureau of Gender Affairs. And that is a governmental agencies, and there are various policies and laws that are put in place. And the government and these governmental agencies that oversee these must take action, must ensure that perpetrators are not only prosecuted but treated. Because we
Right.
don't want to, you know, we don't want a community of people who are just prosecuted and
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
treated. We want a
Yeah.
healthy society. And the only way we're going to get a healthy society is by working with perpetrators as well as victims. But the government agencies must ensure that the laws are enacted and that people are protected. So a lot of women call me and say, Prof, you know, I went to the police department and I filed a restraining order, but the man is still hounding me. So the police force has to be trained. If necessary, the soldier force needs to be trained, and all
Yes.
of the other governmental agencies that work with family and family health and wellness
Yeah.
need to be trained, and there has to be a mechanism, an effective mechanism that ensures that the policies and the laws that are in place to protect victims and to end gender-based violence are enacted.
Yes.
That's the role of our government, and the
Well,
government must do that.
I didn't realize that 70% of women in conflict, war, and humanitarian crisis experience gender-based violence.
I
And
mean, in these camps, in these immigrant camps and you know, moving from one place to the other, women and children are victims. They're raped indiscriminately multiple times. They are physically and emotionally abused. There's no resource for them to be able to document and get protection. I mean,
Right.
it's a difficult thing because the entire community is in chaos and is moving, trying to save itself from warfare. And men in those communities, take out their added frustration on the people who are closest to them, their women and their children.
Right.
It's a very serious, as I say, it's an epidemic. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
worldwide
yeah.
epidemic.
Well,
And we need to treat it, I just want to say, we need to treat it just like how we treated COVID-19.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I also realized, I discovered that globally, female genital mutilation has increased by 15% compared to data several years ago.
Yes, and I was really alarmed and surprised by that because there was such a big campaign in the late 80s, 90s
Hmm.
to end female mutilation. And I thought we had gotten a handle on that, and obviously we have not. I also want to add, because as I develop my own politics, and I call it my own politics and my own cultural activism, and as I work towards equity, I also want to let people know that there's male mutilation. When I was in South Africa visiting one of the camps where girls were being mutilated and had died, there were almost an equal amount of men who had died because they were also in their practices in some South African nations or
Yes.
communities. They were doing it to both the girls and the boys. And the boys were sent out into the woods because part of that, you go out into the fields to be a man kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
in the cold and in the non hygienic environment, they were contracting all kinds of stuff and dying. So, my agenda now, in as much as I'm a feminist, unapologetically, is to ensure that women and children are taken care of, but also to not be mindless that men are also victims. Same in gender-based violence. And men, in fact, who are beaten by their wives or their spouse are much more reluctant to come forward because, oh Lord, I'm a man. How I gonna come and say the woman that beat me? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
want that data because we want to help both men and women. We want to stop those women who are being violent to their men and their children, in as much as we want to stop those men who are being violent to their women and their children. So for me, as I involve in my feminism, as I involve in my gender and cultural activists, I am not doing this divide, and that's something that the West has done. And we're going to take care of women and girls. That's crap. There are as many boys in Jamaica that are being abused as girls, and we need to take care of both.
Yes, yes, yes. Professor Palmer, thank you so much. You bring such enlightening information to us, discourse to us that I really do appreciate it. To wrap, what would you wrap up with? I mean, how would you wrap up this little?
Well, one of the things I want to say that we need more than 16 days, and the 16 days should rule over to 16 more days and rule over to 16 more days. We need 365 days to begin to really get a sense of what's going on and why. And we need to, the data, we don't only just need to collect the data about victims, we really need to talk to the perpetrators and find out why they are doing it. How can they unlearn violence? That to me is really important in terms of our entire society, unlearning violence. Because, Van, as you know, the Caribbean, certainly when I was a child, there was violence, but it was a more peaceful place. One of the major plagues for the Caribbean now is violence. It's unbelievable to me how unsafe the Caribbean has become. So on the one hand, it's this paradise with its sunshine and its green trees and verdancy. But on the other hand, the entire Caribbean has become very violent. And so we need to be focusing our energy equally on victims, but focusing our energy in trying to understand. And some of it we understand. We understand about economic disparity. We understand about joblessness. We understand about guns and dope being brought into the Caribbean. We understand some of those factors. But we really need to get to why this is escalating, why this is continuing. Because if we don't, we'll never be able to solve it. And we'll continue to feel unsafe and live in these spaces. And what we want is to create safe spaces. So my suggestion is 365 days to end violence. And furthermore, we need to ensure that we really begin to focus on our research on healing and what are some of the root stems in our system, in our beings, in our culture that causes this, and eradicate those stems, those roots that are causing this. So I invite everyone to be self-reflective and to stop yourself when you're being violent to whomever. The dog that is barking, the neighbor whose tree that's hanging over your house, the car that cuts you off. There are times and space when we all rile up, right? And we need to acknowledge the violence that is in us and unlearn it. So that's my last piece. Let us unlearn the violence, let us heal, and let us grow in harmony as a wonderful community.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Professor Adisa Palmer, a feminist and a professor at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. Every 10 minutes, a woman is killed, and we're all asked to unite to end violence against women. This is Ron Martin. Caribbeana continues.